Good morning. This is Richard again. Uh, Wanted to tell you a little bit more about my wife, Jo. Uh, we talked a lot. I told you about that, but she knew the night we met, I played classical music and sang classical music to her as well as popular music of that time. And she loved for me to sing to her. And when we would be alone, many times, all through her entire life, she would ask me to sing love songs to her. So that's why I sing mostly love songs. I know a lot of them. And she loved to hear me sing to her. She was not all that much of a musician. She could sing and she could sing harmony very naturally uh, and did very well, but her voice was not very smooth. She had been raised in the country and with a lot of wind out in the garden and in the fields, why she had to scream to be heard, and it kind of ruined her voice. But she had a very pleasant voice. Uh, she tried to take take piano lessons when she was young. I think she took about 6 or 7 years, maybe, of piano, and she could read music very well, but she had no sense of rhythm. Uh, she played first flute in the school orchestra in high school in the marching band, and she had trouble marching. That was, she couldn't keep step. She couldn't march to a beat to save her neck. And that was her constant criticism by her teacher, the music teachers, was her sense of rhythm. And so uh, the we talked about everything as we met and dated, and she knew that I was interested in classical music and maybe even becoming an opera singer because that was still kind of a dream when in my mind when we met. And turned out she loved classical music as much as I did. And she liked the kind of music I liked. And we talked about things we liked and disliked, and we found that we had so much in common. After we married, for many, many years, I had season tickets to the Dallas Symphony concerts and, and also the Dallas Opera. We saw all of their performance on a pretty regular basis. She would go with me to the operas, and I think she enjoyed them as much as I did. And when I sang in the chorus, she would come and hear me, come by herself and hear me sing with the chorus. And of course, she came to the operas that I was in. Uh, the first opera I was in was in 1984, Il Trovatore. And then I was also in, the next year, I was in Don, uh, no, Don Carlo. Somehow that escaped me there for a minute. Uh, but anyway, those are the things that about her that I wanted to tell. Uh, but I was about, I think, early 40s, maybe 42 or 3, and she was 39 or 40. She's 2.5 years younger than I am. And we moved from a suburb of Washington, D.C. I was preaching there. We moved to a small Texas town right close to the border between Texas and Oklahoma on I-35, Denison, Texas. It was a very small town, and I was going to preach for them there. We moved in on a Wednesday, and of course we got everything ready, unmoved. We unpacked and pretty much before church, and we dressed to go to church. He always dressed in a nice dress, and I had a suit and tie, white shirt, and all that. And we went to church that night, and when we got home, about time we were ready to go to bed, she said, "Well, the kids need some uh, things for school. School starts tomorrow, and they need some school supplies, basic things, and we need some milk. I think I'm going to run up to the supermarket and get a few things." I usually didn't go with her to do shopping like that, but that night I said, "Well, I'll go with you." And so we went up to the supermarket. I think it was a Kroger's, and it was late. It was about a quarter till 15 minutes before they closed. And we got up there and went inside. I think we had about 10 minutes to get our things and leave. And we went back to where the milk was in the back of the store, picked up a big jug, and we started to go over to where they sold a few school supplies. And we heard a loud commotion going on up in the front of the store. I mean, it was really loud. Somebody was really hollering loud, and it sounded frightening, really. And I looked up and I saw standing there at the end of the aisle in the back of the store was a tall black woman, skinny, and she had a gun. And it was pointed at a young woman, white woman, who was holding a baby, a small child. And she had ordered her and to take her baby and go back to the back of the store where the restrooms were, and pointed the direction that she was to go. Of course, we knew that, I guess. And then she saw my wife and I and ordered us to do the same. Well, you don't argue with somebody that's got a gun pointed at you. And so I put the milk back in the case, and we went back to the back where the restrooms were. And there were about 3 other people back there, and then that woman and her baby. And there was a black man there, and he wore a mask over half of his face. And he had a gun. And she left us there and went to get more customers, round up more customers that were in the store at that late hour. And while she was gone, that woman with the baby said, "I can't believe this is real." She lived in a very small town and never had much problems and stuff. And here she was in a robbery, and she just couldn't believe it. Well, the man said, "Maybe I better shoot one of you to make sure you believe this is real." And I had slipped myself between the gunman and my wife, and I was facing her. I wanted to protect her, and if he shot our way, he'd kill me and not her. And that's what I was in. That's why I did that. And she said that later, she told me that when he said he'd better shoot one of them, he raised his gun and pointed it directly at my back. But about that time, this other woman, robber, brought three more people back there, and it interrupted his thought. I think they were all on drugs and high and very hyper and very dangerous. People like that are very dangerous. And so, uh, oddly enough, it didn't frighten me at all. I was not afraid at all. I was not nervous or anything. It was just something that happened. And so she said, I could still hear a big commotion up front in the store, but she wanted to put us all in a room. And she tried to put us in the men's restroom. Well, it was too small for 6 or 7 people, and we couldn't get in there. And so uh, the women's room wasn't much bigger, and so they decided, this tall black girls decided that she would put us all in the meat locker. It was back there, and then there was a door into the warehouse at the back of the store, but she wanted to put us in the meat locker. And so she did. They had that meat locker open. And as we went in, she struck every one of us on the back of the head with her gun as we went in to that place. Well, that gun uh, broke the skin on our heads, all of us, and we bled profusely. The head bleeds more than most other parts of your body. Uh, and so I had blood all over my suit and shirt and tie, and Joe had blood all over her dress, and everybody else did too. And when she shut the door on all of us, uh, someone suggested we go out into the parking lot. There was a door to the outside, and I said, we better not do that. That may be where they're parked, and they probably have the motor running in a car, and somebody would kill us if we come out that door. And I said, we better just wait. The police will be here in a little bit. Don't worry about it. We'll be all right. And I calmed everybody down. And about that time, the door opened again. It scared the life out of us. We thought they were going to come in and kill us. But they pushed a young boy in. He was sacked groceries. He was just a young teenager, and it was a part-time job for him to work in the grocery store. And evidently he had talked back to them, and they pistol whipped him pretty badly. His head was really bleeding a lot, and he was in a great deal of pain, almost passed out. Anyway, she shut the door, and we kind of looked after that young man a little bit. In a few minutes, it opened again, and it's always a little bit of a shock when that door opens. You don't know what to expect, of course. Well, they pushed a woman in, and she was the manager of the store, and she said that they took this. There were 7 of these robbers. Well, all of them had guns, and they grabbed her by the hair of her head and pushed her down toward the floor where there was a safe where they kept the money. And they told her she had one chance to unlock that uh, safe. It had a combination safe on it. She was scared to death, but she managed to do it. She unlocked that safe, and they got the money. It had been a special sale day, and the business had been really booming that day, and so there was a lot of money that day. in that safe that they took. And anyway, uh, she was there in there with us, and it wasn't 5 minutes till that door opened again, and it was the police. I knew they'd be there pretty quickly, and they did come and let us out. We went down to the station in the middle of the night there, and they had it. Joe and I look at mug books. Well, they all look alike to me. I couldn't tell. I didn't recognize any faces at all. That was a waste of time. But I think we spent maybe a couple of hours going through those mug books there. And of course, the medical people came out, and they stitched up our head. I think we had about 6 stitches in our head, my wife and I. And they cleaned us up a little bit, but I was still, my clothes and her clothes were still very bloody. And anyway, we went home that night, and for the next 5 or 6 weeks, or maybe more, we were very paranoid. We were afraid of every black person that we saw in the street. It might have been one of them, and they might recognize us and shoot us. And so we were a little paranoid there for a good long while. But I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear that story about that. And I think I'll tell you one other story. When my wife and I moved, I retired at the age of 78, and we moved from Wichita Falls to Lubbock, Texas, where we lived in a retirement community. And tried to think where I was. Oh, my wife said one day that she thought I had Parkinson's disease by the way I walked. So I went to a doctor, and he said that I did have Parkinson's and sent me to a neurologist who confirmed that I had Parkinson's disease. And so those two doctors began feeding me medications for Parkinson's disease. I took those medications for 7 years. And my wife passed away in 2010. And in December of 2014, I began to have hallucinations, went out of my mind, and my son took me to the hospital. And they barely saved my life. I was in the hospital an entire month where they barely kept me alive. And then I went into a rehab, but I was so bad that they put me in hospice care because I had episodes, strange things happened to me, and I felt like I was dying, and I would get short of breath, and I would get down to my last gasp of air. Just, I wasn't sure I could take another breath, but I breathed, and when I did, all that went away, and I was perfectly fine. Well, I documented all of those episodes. I had 35 episodes in about over the next 6 months. I got out of rehab and stayed with my daughter in for a while, and we thought any day I was going to die because I was so sick. And she got to where my daughter got to where she couldn't take care of me, and so they bundled me up and put me on an airplane and flew me down to the Dallas area where I'd get better medical care, perhaps. And uh, I lived with my youngest son, Joe, and we lived together for 5 years. But anyway, I moved in with him in 2015 in the summer, I think it was in June. And of course, hospice required that I see a doctor in the Dallas area. And so I found a good doctor and went to her. And she said, "You don't have Parkinson's disease at all, never have had it." And she sent me to a neurologist who confirmed it. And I was taking at that time 19 different prescriptions for Parkinson's disease. And so they began taking those pills away from me. They had to wean me off of them. They were too powerful to just stop. I had to be taken slowly off of each of those medications. And it took over a year for me to get rid of those pills. But with everything that I did from the very first moment to just reduce one of the pills, I began to feel better. And as time went on, I got better and better and better and better. And finally, I got down to the fact that all 19 pills were gone, and I felt perfectly fine. Except for that one, I do still take that prescription sleeping pill because I have trouble sleeping. But that is my near-death experience. Nobody expected me to survive that. Doctors, nurses, my family, all of them believed I would. When I moved in with Joe in 2015, he didn't think I'd live a week there, but I went to that doctor and I started getting better. And so we lived together for 5 years and didn't kill each other in those 5 years. So I thought I'd tell you these additional stories to what I've told before. Next time, I think I'll tell you about my books that I write. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very surprised that anybody is interested at all. I do have my autobiography. I showed it to you once. The title is Oops. I have a lot of oops and downs in my life, and it's pretty hilarious, really, pretty funny. And if you type in Oops by Richard Norman on Amazon, you can buy my autobiography for $6. And there's a picture in there of my wife and a couple of other pictures. I used to have a lot of pictures in it, but this is my third updating of my autobiography. And so I lost some of those pictures, most of the pictures that were in it originally. Anyway, that's enough for today, and I'll talk about my books next time. Thank you so much. I appreciate your interest very much.